discussing more about variables, let's talk about a couple things I didn't mention in the previous video. In this line of code here, line 5, I have declared and initialized a variable. Let's break that down a little bit and discuss in a little more detail what that means. In this first line of code here, line 5, I am declaring a variable. What that means is I have declared to the compiler that the word hello, when encountered from this point forward, is to be treated as a string. What does that mean? Well, a string is where you can store literal text. So any type of literal text that you want to be stored can be put into a string object. That's what the word hello will be treated as for the remainder of this program. Now in line 6, I have initialized the word hello. So I've taken my variable string hello and I've declared to the computer that the word hello is a string. And now I have initialized that string object to contain the literal text COMPUTER. Okay, those 8 characters will now be associated with that string, and I can print that here. So in this line of code, again, I have declared my string variable, and in this line of code, I have initialized my string variable. We can do the same thing with an int. Okay, we could break apart our int. We could declare and initialize over 2 lines of code. Okay, you can even declare multiple variables at once. So for instance, I could declare some other variables here. I could make an A and a B. And if I wanted to get really creative, I could even initialize the variable A here and then choose to initialize the variable B at a later point in time. So there's different ways we can treat these variables. Okay, and again, that process is called declaring and initializing. Well, why do we have ints, doubles, booleans, and in fact, if you remember from the previous video, there's even a few other types of primitives that we didn't even discuss, like char, byte, short, long, and float. We will use some of those variables throughout the year, but your int, double, and boolean are sort of your primary variables. So in fact, I just went into Google here and I typed Java int variable range, and Google gave me a real nice definition as to what an int data is. It's a 32-bit. And what that is, that's how much memory you are eating up every time you declare an int variable in your program. Luckily, 32 bits is a minuscule amount of data. It won't really affect your computer at all. It says here that its minimum value is -2 billion, roughly, -2 to the 31st power, and that its maximum value is 2 to the 31st power minus 1. We'll talk about that more in another day. And like it says, this is generally used as the default data type for integral values, unless there's a concern about memory. So for your typical programs, most of your values are going to exist somewhere between -2 and +2 billion, and you'll use an int variable anytime you're just dealing with integral values. Now, if you want to insist on getting storage for values that are going to contain decimals, probably want to use a double. Okay? And then, like we mentioned before, the Boolean stores true and false. What happens if I take an int value like x and I try to put in a decimal value like 8.88? I get a compile error, possible loss of precision. You'll notice that I cannot execute my program right now. It's preventing me because of this compile error. What if I take my double and I put in the integer value 3? That is allowed. So you can put an integer value into a double, but you cannot put a double or a decimal value into an integer. Okay? It's very important to remember that. One thing that's a little interesting, if I print variable y, let's see what happens. We printed 3.0. Now, recall that in double y, we stored the value 3 as an int, and the computer forced it into a double type print. Okay? That's because if the computer sees Y and it's told to print Y, it's going to print a double. So I'm going to turn that integer value into a double value. I encourage you to experiment a little bit more. Try putting in some various values to your ints, your doubles, your strings, and see what happens.